What is your oh shit I've got to get the hell out of here right now story? Was sleeping at a friend's house. Went to the kitchen to get some water. Her father hugged me from behind. I was 14, I guess. Never went to their house again. When I was 15, I went to a friend's place. Her dad was smoking in the kitchen and when he saw his daughter brought friends over, he got excited and started flirting with a few of us. It was super skeezy. When I got home, I gave my dad a big hug and said, "I'm really happy you never hit on any of my friends." He was silent for a moment and looked a little confused. Then he finally said, "Way to have low standards there, sweetheart." Your dad's reaction somehow made it wholesome to me. He seems like a good person. Yes. But I would also have questions and concerns if my daughter said that to me. Living in Baltimore some years back, and I was driving home through a rough area of the city. Sitting at a stoplight behind an already stopped car. Another pulls up next to me on the right. Not really thinking anything of this. The light turns green. Neither of these cars move, and I see a car zipping up behind me. I look to my left, and I see two guys running towards me. I'm so thankful that I left a good deal of space between me and the car in front. I hooked it around the car I front and sped off. Pretty sure I was going to be a victim of a carjacking, or maybe something worse. Glad they ill-timed their plan and I gave myself that space. Lesson here is always keep your head on a swivel in Baltimore. Guy I knew stopped behind a car at a stop street. As soon as he stopped, the people in the car in front of him jumped out and ran to the back of their car. So towards him. He reversed and hit the car behind him. The people in front ran around their car to the opposite sides. They were just switching seats drivers. That sounds like it ended with a bunch of confused people. At least one pissed off person. I was driving north on I-65 in the middle of Indiana. The sky was getting dark. The wind was picking up. It started hailing. I turned on the radio to hear that a tornado was nearby. I determined it was behind me going from southwest to northeast and about to cross over the interstate. Other cars were driving slow or pulling over because of the rain and hail. I was hauling, but to get away from there. I lived in South Everett, Washington for a couple years. Was walking home from the bus stop to my apartment, which took me behind the Home Depot. Suddenly a van starts following me. I hear the side door slide open and look behind me to see a man with the top half of his body hanging out the slider door looking at me. I took off running towards my apartment. Literally running as far as I could. The van started going faster. By chance a guy was pulling out of the driveway of my apartment complex. Sees me running for my life and stops. The van immediately turns around and speeds off. Guy asks if I'm okay. I ask him to just stay there and please watch me walk into my apartment, which was the building next to his. He did. Thank God. I started carrying mace and a very large knife the next day. One of my good friends was stabbed in S.E. Everett. I am sorry that happened to you and that it can be such a rough place. I was in downtown New York City a couple of blocks away from the WTC gawking at a fire. There were tons of people milling around watching. They had blocked off some streets, and I asked a cop how I could get around to where I needed to go further downtown. He told me which streets were closed, but that they might expand it, so I should get moving. The conversation was pretty casual. As I started walking away I looked back, and he had his radio to his ear, and whatever he heard, he panicked, went as white as a ghost, and started yelling for people to move further back. I turned around and jogged the hell out of there and made it to the Brooklyn Bridge before the first tower came down. Jogged the hell out of there. I do not think I have ever read that phrase before. Well, I was wearing a suit and dress shoes, and to be honest there is a social pressure, even in that moment, that makes running through a row of people standing around or walking on a city street pretty difficult. A 500-pound hog got loose at the state fair and started charging right at me. I have never run so fast in my life. People think pigs are cute or silly, but a mother sow can remove limbs. Worse still, the boars will corner you with no chance of escape and then tell you incredibly uninteresting stories for several hours. Once upon a barren moor, there dwelt a bear, also a boar. The bear could not bear the boar. The boar thought the bear a bore. At last the bear could bear no more. That boar that bored him on the moor. So one morn he bored the boar. The boar will bore the bear no more. I was solo camping in the woods during a phase where I wanted to be a survival expert. I hiked out, miles from any roads or building, built a shelter, and then hiked back the way I came. Less than a mile away from my camp, I found a dead coyote, decapitated, gutted, and laid out like a sacrifice or something. The eyes were gouged out, and it was strung across a big, flat rock. A rock which I used as a marker on the way in. So I know it had not been there a day before. I ran out of there as fast as I could, knife at the ready. Probably 10 miles back to my house. I still have no idea who would have done it, but I know I did not want to run into them in the woods alone. Sounds like that day you were a survival expert. A true survival expert never leaves his house tap's head. Yes, that's why we invented the house. St. Patrick's Day, midnight. I 26 at the time. Female was walking home from the Irish bar I worked in. Saw a lad attack a girl and run. Checked on the lass to make sure she was alright. Stayed with her until the police arrived. Gave my statement. Told them I was nervous about walking home. 2 guys who were on the scene offered to walk me home. Policeman said there you go. You resorted. That's right. Sent me off with 2 strangers. I scolded myself for being so nervous. Told myself it was really nice of them to offer to walk me home. We were about halfway to my house when they started talking about what they'd witnessed, how that girl deserved to be attacked, and that their friend the attacker had done nothing wrong. My spidey senses weren't just tingling. They were electrifying. We were coming up to the last populated street before the dark alleyway and then the park that I needed to walk through to get home. I knew if I kept walking with these guys, I was in danger. I just ducking knew. I checked my phone and told them my friend was in the conveniently nearest club just across the road. Thanked them for their offer to walk me home and headed to the club entry before they could say anything. Jumped in a taxi. As we drove past the alleyway those duckers were waiting for me. They'd called my bluff about going into the club and they were watching out for me. I don't know what they'd have done to me, but that's my biggest listen to your instinct story, and I am really ducking glad I did. I was kicking myself because my manager, who was also my friend mutual crush, had offered to walk me home, but I didn't want him having to walk all the way home himself in the other direction after a co-worker got off the bus at night in Scarborough, Ontario, and a guy stepped out from behind the bus shelter and started calling to her to wait up. He ran up to her. She screamed, "I do not know you," and ran into a convenience store. The guy hung around outside for a few minutes, then walked over to a vehicle and got in and drove off. She waited for a neighbor in her apartment complex to come over and walk her home. She filed a police report, and it turned out she had narrowly escaped Paul Bernardo, then known as the Scarborough Rapist, later known as a serial killer, alongside his wife Carla Homolka. I was walking to my house from my ex-house very early in the morning when I saw this little girl with a backpack running for her life from 2 big street dogs. At that moment I didn't think, and I ran towards the dogs and missed a kick. The 2 dogs came after me, biting my legs and arm. They were out of control, and these were like the longest 5 minutes of my life. I couldn't stop them from biting me. The little girl kept running until I didn't see her anymore. It was just me and the dogs attacking me. I tried to climb a fence to get inside a house, but I couldn't when a taxi driver stopped and went out of the car with a short stick, and he tried to scare them off, giving me a chance to run. And without thinking, I got inside the car. The guy just ran a couple of times around the car with the dogs behind until he got in, and he drove off like really fast. He took me to the hospital, where I got a lot of stitches on my legs, arms and hands. That guy's my hero. Every now and then I go to his taxi stop and give them sandwiches or something. We never knew what happened to those dogs. You probably saved that kid's life. More than likely. The damage a dog can do to a child is horrific. OPS a feckin' hero. Yeah. Not even to just young children. A 14-year-old girl, where I grew up, was killed a few years back by a few dogs. One time I was driving through Kansas in the middle of the night with my girlfriend on a road trip. Summer of 2017. We had issues with the car breaking down in Nebraska and were sputting along until we reached Colby, Kansas, and waited for night. so the roads were less busy as we were driving along. Not HWY 70, but just south to stay off the highways. A semi caught up to us. The car did not want to go past 50-60 miles per hour, and I did not want to push it and break down. Needless to say, I was going too slow for this semi truck. For about an entire hour this guy's riding my butt, flashing his lights, etc. Never honked his horns though. I would slow down and pull off to the side a little bit to let him pass, but every time I did he would slow down too and give me a ton of space. It's now about 2-3 am. We are in the middle of nowhere coming up close to the border of Colorado. He is still constantly riding up to my butt and turning his lights on and off again. We finally come across a gas station and pull over to a pump on the right side. I cannot emphasize how literal I mean by middle of nowhere. It's flat deserts forever in all directions. It's an empty shell gas station that is closed and dark as dark. We hope the truck will just pass us and we pretend to pump gas. This ducking truck slows down all the way and stops right there on the road next to us. He proceeds to back his truck up enough to pull into the gas station behind us, perpendicular to our car. I start losing my shit and looking around. I'm standing outside of my car and my girlfriend is screaming for me to get back in the car. This guy gets out of the semi and starts walking directly towards us. He is only about 50 yards away when I notice a small brown pickup truck sitting on the backside of the shell. Eerily placed. I notice there is someone in it. I run towards him. As I get closer I realize there is a police badge painted on the side of this brown pickup and the man inside is actually an officer. I can only imagine what this guy on late night duty was thinking when I'm running up to him. He rolls down the window with a confused look on his face. My girlfriend is screaming at me in panic as this guy gets within 10 yards of the car, while I'm spitting about 50 words out of my mouth in about 2 seconds explaining our situation. The officer does not say a word and just drives around our car. The man notices and does an immediate U-turn back towards his truck. As the officer is yelling at him to stop, I hop back into my car, look in the rearview mirror for a second to see the officer getting out to try to talk to this guy. I turn on the car, hit the gas, and drive into Colorado. A few minutes later, I will spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if that officer was not just sitting there that night. Whoever you are, man, bless your soul. Edit Street View for the curious link. Edit to a lot of people keep suggesting that the driver was trying to indicate that maybe a light was out on my car or something. Trust me, that was the first thing I checked at the gas station when I got out of the car. The only thing wrong with my car was its inability to accelerate past 50 miles per hour without sputtering. Also, I was driving at night because the heat was about 100 F. We needed a break from driving through Nebraska, and there is less traffic to worry about at night. We didn't get the car fixed right away because we needed to get to a gig in southern Colorado that weekend, which made us enough money to fix the car. Yes, we were living out of the car tents and often spent a ton of time driving through the nights or sleeping in random places in the middle of nowhere. Also, this took place in Sharon Springs, Kansas, and the shell is now Phillips 66, or at least according to Google Maps. I'm from Kansas. Can confirm that part is very middle of nowhere. Glad you were able to live to tell the story, and I have had a semi out there try and drive me off the road more than once too. Apparently they think they can just murder people if there is not a town for 30 miles. I woke up one Friday in a hotel and the internet was down. I went to the hotel lobby to see what was up and saw scenes of chaos on the TV. A crowd had started to gather to watch, including the hotel staff. One employee told me the government had shut down the internet to test it. The scenes on the TV were of violent protests beginning all over Egypt as people made their first push to occupy Tahrir Square. It was January 25th, 2011, and I was in Benghazi, Libya, without my US passport. Needless to say, I spent my energy over the next few days trying to get out of the country. I was able to leave, but many of the people I was working with weren't as lucky. The revolution started in Benghazi less than 2 weeks later. It was surreal watching Anderson Cooper broadcasting live from the hotel I had just been staying in. Edit. A bunch of people asked about my passport, so I'll elaborate further. I am actually paranoid about giving up my passport when I travel. So it was an odd story how that happened. It was my second trip, and I always brought color copies of my passport to give when someone asked for it, so I'd never hand over my original. My first trip I traveled with someone who had been to Libya multiple times. I am an architect, and we were working for a Turkish contractor. They requested the passport that first trip to get a stamp. I initially refused and said I would do it myself if needed. The other architect was more senior and explained they just used a runner to take it to the police station and get a stamp, which was required if you stay longer than a week. He showed me his, so I backed down and let them have it. I got it back that day and it had the stamp. On my second trip they requested the passport for the same process, but I still didn't have it back by the third day when the internet was shut off. I called our company from the hotel to get a plane ticket to Istanbul. The next flight was on a Saturday afternoon. The client had my passport and didn't want us to leave because they were afraid we'd trigger a panic at the job site. So they kept claiming they didn't have my passport back yet. We ended up in a full-blown shouting match demanding it back when we were in danger of missing the flight out. They finally gave it back after we started threatening to call our company and walk away from the project. The stress didn't end there, because my passport didn't have the stamp once it was returned. I was stopped when going through customs trying to leave, and it was clear they were having a conversation about the missing stamp. They ended up letting me go, but I didn't feel like I could take a breath till I was in the air. I had been communicating with a close friend via text throughout all this. I didn't want to worry my wife about the situation. He knew to contact her if I stopped responding. I called her that Saturday night from Istanbul to tell her what had happened and that I was no longer in the country. What is one actually supposed to do in a situation like that? Is there a checklist for evolutions and the like? Whenever there is an imminent war, the US Embassy usually recommends all American nationals leave the country or go to the embassy for assistance in leaving, because eventually the embassy and all state dept staff will also evacuate. In Libya, there was the whole Benghazi scandal, which resulted in the US ambassador and CIA staff being killed. Some architect friends of mine were in Libya working on a government complex when they both got messages and phone calls from the British embassy saying, "Get to the airport or British embassy now. Do not go back to the hotel, not even to get your passport." They left the meeting and got straight to the airport and got on the first flight to any European country without passports, using some other papers an official gave them in the airport. The civil war was on the news by the time they got back to the UK. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for more videos.